Okay, here we're gonna start with the bottom layer. You don't have to go in the order I'm going in, but I started with green. I'm gonna roll that out. And the way you wanna roll it out is do a couple of rolls in each direction to make sure that it's even. And now we're gonna go for the next color, which is and we're doing the colors of the cake only, not the white icing between. We're gonna do that later. So just roll out the clay, soften it in your hands. That's why I'm rolling it in the palm of my hands. Roll it around. Make sure that it is the same thickness as the first one. So here we're going to compare them. Yep, same. Now go for the second and the third, I meant. Always do small rolling movements rather than continuous ones, so that you're not ending up with a very thin piece of clay. And finally, with this one, the last one, we're going to do the same thing. Now when you lift it off the table or the surface, just make sure, oh, that's a little bit too thin, so we're gonna do it over again. If there's not enough clay, just add some more. Roll it out carefully, a couple of short rolls per section, and that's pretty much even. Now you can either do this by hand, roll the clay into little balls and then flatten them and then make sure that they're all the same size, or you can use this cookie cutter. Well, I call it a cookie cutter, but it's a clay cutter, and you can find them at multiple craft stores. So here I'm gonna cut out a circle in each of the colors that we rolled out. That's going to make each layer of the cake. Take your time with it, so that the edges are nice and smooth. And here we're gonna start not stacking them, but stacking so that we can see that the sizes are all the same. The reason we're not stacking them is because we're gonna have the buttercream or the frosting in between. Don't forget to wash or wipe your hands. I use rubbing alcohol and baby wipes. It takes off all of the clay that gets stuck onto our hands that could come off onto the next piece of clay, and you want the colors to be clean and have no residue. Also clean your materials so that you're not contaminating the other clay with the previous colors. Now we're going to roll out our white clay. So we're going to roll it out into kind of like a long, thinner sheet of clay, thinner than the layers of cake, because when you look at a cake, the cake is usually thicker than the icing between each layer. You're gonna use the same cutter that you used for the layers, and now we're gonna do 4 layers of white, and see how it's thinner than the cake? So that's 1, 2, 3, and finally a 4th one. Now we're going to roll out some white clay to do the fondant that goes and wraps around the cake layers. This is the same white that we used. Cut off the edge so that there's a straight line. We'll fix that later. Now we're going to layer the cake. We're going to do 1 layer of cake, 1 layer of the white icing. You can go in any order that you like. You can do an ombre if you have those colors. You can do whatever you like. Just be creative. Just make sure that when you are placing the cakes and the fondant or icing between, make sure that you are just arranging them so that they are stacked nicely and neatly, and so that they all look the same. Pat that down a little bit. You want to roll it out just to get all the sides smooth. And finally, we're going to wrap it with our fondant. So here's a sheet of white clay that I've rolled out, and I've kind of estimated how thick to make it or how wide. But you're gonna put the clay cake on top and you're gonna adjust it so that it is the same size of the length of all the cake stacked together. This can be a trial and error process, so you might roll it out and have to do it again. That's okay. Make sure that the edges are all straight. Again, we can always fix this because clay is very malleable. Now we've rolled it, and now we're gonna just cut off that edge. Just trim off that little fondant. There you go. And use your fingers, the tips of your fingers, and just roll it out. Kind of push the clay very gently. It will move very easily. We're gonna make sure that this looks really nice and neat. Just be patient. Continue to push the clay with your fingertips to connect the pieces together at the top and at the sides. Roll it out slowly. What might happen is you might get a few air bubbles, and I'm going to show you guys how to take care of that because there are spaces underneath the clay. So you're going to grab a needle tool, and if you see a little bump of air or pocket of air, just kind of pierce it. And now you're going to grab some cornstarch because that's going to help smooth the edges and remove any fingerprints off of the clay, and it should be all smooth. If you find that your fingers are sticking to the clay, that's when the cornstarch is going to come in handy. The most important step is next, and that's putting this piece of clay in the freezer for about 5 or 10 minutes before we slice into it. And the reason for that is because we don't want our hands that warm the clay to make it messy when we slice in. So the next thing we're going to do is make the decorations, and I'm going to use some pastel colors. I'm going to start off with yellow, and I'm going to form it into 3 tiny little balls. I'm going to flatten them, and we're going to roll them inwards. So make sure that you flatten it and roll it inwards. And then take the other one and wrap it around the first one and then the third one. You guys can kind of see how I did it rather than me explaining. Chop off the end with your blade so that it's on a flat surface. And then you're going to continue with the other colors. If you have any issues with this, just stop the video, rewind it, put it on a slower speed so that you can follow along. But it's really quite simple once you get the hang of it. There is another option that I like to do, and that's by using an icing tip. This one is a Wilton 14. I simply push the clay through it, but first I make a sticky surface with clay and liquid clay so that when you push it out, it sticks to the paper. You can use the back of a pen to do that. Always lift it up with your blade so that you're not destroying the structure. Next, we're going to make the little bunny ears, and I'm just going to roll these into kind of like a simple teardrop shape, and you're going to flatten them out on the hard surface. Not too much so that they stick, but enough so that you get the shape that you want. You're going to take some white clay, roll it into a smaller but same shape of the teardrop, and put it on top and gently press down to fill it out. Just keep it in the center. Over here, you're going to cut the bottom part of the ears to make them flat, bake them, and then you'll be able to add them to the cake later on when they're hardened. Now that our cake is ready, we're going to take it out, and we're going to make sure that our blade is clean so that nothing gets on it. And you're going to basically just smoothly glide it down through the slices, the layers of cake, create like a little piece right there, and gently take it out. See how the colors haven't blended into each other? That's because of the freezing, which is nice and neat. Now we're going to texture it. Grab your toothpick or sewing needle if that's what you're comfortable with, and I want you to make little tiny texturing details. I would say little tiny circles that overlap each other. Go in different directions so it doesn't look like it's swirly, but it looks like a piece of cake. Do this to the individual slice as well. Use some liquid clay as a glue, basically. put some on top of the cake to start adding those decorations you made earlier. And keep going until you make your cake and decorate it however you like. Don't forget to add the ears. And that's basically how you make a layered cake with a covered icing and creative decorations. Have fun!